The Elder Scrolls is home to some of the most beautiful landscapes in gaming, but hidden among them are places that leave a very different impression. Locations where something feels wrong the moment you arrive. It isn't always because of powerful enemies or deadly traps. Sometimes it's the atmosphere, the silence, the history, or the unsettling feeling that the land itself remembers the horrors that took place there. From forgotten villages hiding terrible secrets to abandoned cities scarred by unimaginable tragedy, these are the places that linger in your mind long after you've left. They challenge the idea that Tameriel is simply a world of adventure and remind us that beneath its kingdoms and ancient ruins lies a darker, far more disturbing history. These are the most unsettling places in all of the Elder Scrolls. For most RPGs, the opening settlement is designed to make players feel comfortable. It's a place to learn the mechanics, meet friendly faces, and ease into the adventure ahead. Seyda-Neen, the very first location players explore in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, does almost the exact opposite. From the moment you step off the prison ship and onto its damp wooden docks, there is an unmistakable feeling that you don't belong here. Everything about the village feels strange. There is an unfamiliar and quietly unsettling. Rather than welcoming players into a vibrant fantasy world, Seyda-Neen introduces them to a province that feels indifferent to their existence. The architecture is unlike anything seen in traditional fantasy settings. Giant insects replace horses, the air is thick with swamp mist, and an eerie silence hangs over the settlement despite the handful of people going about their daily lives. It isn't a haunted village in the traditional sense, nor is it particularly dangerous compared to the locations players will eventually discover across Vardenfell. Instead, Seyda-Neen unsettles through atmosphere. It immediately communicates that Morrowind is not interested in making players feel comfortable, and that first impression has become one of the defining characteristics of the entire game. The journey begins before you even leave the Census and Excise office. Fresh from the prison, stripped of identity, dropped into an unfamiliar province, you know almost nothing about the world around you. The Imperial officials process your paperwork with complete indifference. The conversation feels administrative rather than welcoming. No grand celebration marks your arrival, no heroic introduction. You're simply another person stepping into an unfamiliar land. That understated beginning quietly establishes the emotional tone. You are alone, and nobody particularly cares. Once outside, the environment immediately reinforces that isolation. Seyda-Neen sits within a vast coastal swamp. Water surrounds much of the settlement. Mud replaces clean roads. Reeds sway in stagnant pools. Mist drifts across the marshes. Visibility constantly feels slightly restricted. Unlike the bright forests of Cyrodiil or the open plains of Skyrim, this landscape feels enclosed. The terrain seems to absorb sound. Everything appears damp, heavy, almost reluctant to welcome visitors. The sound design deserves enormous credit for creating this atmosphere. Rather than filling the environment with cheerful music, Morrowind often allows natural ambience to dominate. The distant buzzing of insects, water gently moving beneath the docks, the strange cries of local wildlife. Long stretches of quiet. Players accustomed to lively fantasy settings immediately notice the difference. Silence becomes part of the experience. Every sound suddenly feels significant. Even your own footsteps seem unusually loud against the wooden walkways. Perhaps the most striking feature of Seyda-Neen is how alien it all feels. Nothing resembles familiar medieval fantasy. The architecture curves organically. Buildings appear grown rather than constructed. Massive silt striders tower above the landscape like living monuments. Their enormous insect bodies immediately challenge player expectations. Instead of horses waiting outside stables, transportation comes from gigantic arthropods. That single visual communicates everything players need to know. Vardenfell follows different rules. The wildlife reinforces this feeling. Strange creatures wander nearby, mud crabs scuttle along the shoreline, netches drift peacefully through distant skies, cliff racers occasionally appear overhead. Even harmless animals possess unfamiliar shapes. Players rarely recognize anything immediately. Every creature requires observation. Curiosity ultimately replaces certainty. Compared to traditional fantasy settings, Seder Neen feels genuinely foreign. Its residents contribute to the discomfort in subtle ways. Very few people appear openly hostile, yet almost nobody seems especially interested in you either. Conversations remain practical, transactional, and occasionally suspicious. The villagers already have lives, jobs, concerns. The newly arrived prisoner simply becomes another temporary presence, and that indifference feels remarkably realistic. The world doesn't revolve around the player. Instead, the player quietly enters a world already in motion. The village's small size further amplifies its isolation. Seder Neen consists of only a handful of buildings, a lighthouse, a trade house, government offices, scattered homes. Beyond that lies swamp in every direction. There is no bustling marketplace, no towering castle, no protective city walls. Civilization feels fragile. The wilderness becomes almost immediately beyond the final house. That proximity creates constant awareness of the unknown waiting outside. The infamous murder investigation involving Processus Vitellius subtly deepens the unsettling atmosphere. Even within this quiet settlement, violence has already occurred. The dead tax collector lies abandoned in the marshes. His murder reminds players that danger exists even here. There are no dramatic cutscenes, no panic throughout the village. Life simply continues. That quiet acceptance somehow makes the event more disturbing. Death has become another ordinary part of life. Then there is Fargoth, as I've talked about before, one of the first friendly faces players encounter. His nervous personality immediately suggests underlying insecurity. Soon afterward, players receive the opportunity to spy on him and steal his hidden savings. The game quietly encourages moral ambiguity almost immediately. There are no simple heroes or villains. Even early interactions carry uncomfortable choices. Seder Neen introduces players to Morrowind's moral complexity long before the main story begins. The census and excise of itself deserves attention. Government buildings often symbolize order, security, authority. Here it feels strangely detached. Officials remain professional, efficient, emotionally distant. The bureaucracy functions perfectly. Human warmth remains scarce. Leaving the office feels less like beginning an adventure and more like being quietly released into uncertainty. Compared to later Elder Scrolls starting locations, the contrast becomes fascinating. Oblivion begins with the Emperor personally speaking to the player before escaping through dramatic tunnels. Skyrim opens amid executions and dragon attacks. Seder Neen offers neither spectacle nor urgency. Instead, it embraces quiet discomfort. Nothing explodes, nothing chases you. The world simply feels unfamiliar enough to create anxiety naturally. That restraint remains remarkably effective. The surrounding geography reinforces this emotional tone. Travelling beyond Seder Neen immediately exposes players to hostile wilderness. Roads become unreliable, creatures attack unexpectedly, directions often remain vague, quest markers don't exist. Navigation also depends upon observation and memory. Players quickly realise they cannot rely upon modern conveniences. Exploration itself becomes slightly unsettling. Every wrong turn carries consequences. The weather also contributes enormously. Cloud cover frequently softens the light. Rain drifts across the swamp. Fog settles between marshes. Visibility changes constantly. Combined with the muted colour palette, Seder Neen rarely appears vibrant. Instead, it feels weathered, ancient, almost forgotten. Even the wooden docks creak beneath your feet as though the village itself has aged alongside the surrounding landscape. Culturally, players begin as outsiders. The Dunmer possess customs unfamiliar to Imperial characters. Religion differs, politics differ. Social expectations also differ as well. Many conversations subtly remind players they do not belong. Acceptance must be earned, knowledge must be learned. Nothing comes automatically. This cultural distance creates psychological isolation alongside physical separation. The Silt Strider perhaps symbolises Satanine better than anything else. Towering silently above the settlement, it represents both connections and separation. It offers travel, yet its strange appearance constantly reminds players they have entered a world unlike any other fantasy setting. Even transportation feels alien. There is also remarkable environmental storytelling throughout the village. Abandoned crates, weathered buildings, government presence alongside struggling locals. Everything quietly communicates economic hardship. Satanine functions primarily as a colonial outpost rather than a thriving community. Imperial administration exists, prosperity largely does not. That imbalance subtly shapes every interaction. Ultimately, Satanine earns its place among the most unsettling places in all of the Elder Scrolls because it deliberately rejects the comforting conventions of a traditional starting village. Rather than welcoming players with safety and familiarity, it immerses them in environments defined by silence, alien beauty, cultural isolation, and quiet indifference. The swamp seems endless, the architecture feels otherworldly, the people remain distant. Even the sounds of the landscape constantly remind you that this is not a world designed around your expectations. Every detail works together to communicate the same message. You are a stranger here. Long before players encounter living gods, ash storms, or the horrors hidden beneath Red Mountain, Satanine has already accomplished something remarkable. It has made an entire province feel unknowable. And that first uneasy walk along its damp wooden docks remains one of the most effective introductions, not only in the Elder Scrolls, but in the role-playing games as a whole, proving that sometimes the most unsettling place isn't a haunted ruin or cursed temple. It's the very first place you call home. Few locations in the Elder Scrolls transform so completely from ordinary to terrifying as Hackdirt. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than another forgotten village hidden in the hills of Cyrodiil. A handful of weathered buildings, quiet roads, and a tiny population struggling to survive far from the Empire's bustling cities. If you didn't know any better, you might assume Hackdirt was simply another rural settlement that time had forgotten. But within moments of arriving, something begins to feel profoundly wrong. The villagers watch you far too closely. Conversations end abruptly when you approach. Doors remain firmly shut, and every interaction carries an unmistakable sense that you are not welcome. Unlike most towns in Oblivion, where strangers are greeted with curiosity or polite indifference, Hackdirt treats outsiders almost like intruders who have wandered into a place they were never meant to find. It is one of the few settlements in the series where players instinctively begin looking over their shoulder before anything openly threatening has ever happened. Inspired heavily by H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth, Hackdirt abandons traditional fantasy in favour of psychological horror, creating an atmosphere of suspicion, religious fanaticism, and hidden terror that lingers long after the quest has ended. The first thing players notice is silence. Not peaceful silence, but uncomfortable silence. Most Oblivion settlements feel alive. People walk between shops, guards patrol the streets, conversations drift through marketplaces. Hackdirt lacks that rhythm entirely. Its streets often feel almost empty. The few residents who are present rarely appear relaxed. Instead, they linger, watching, observing strangers with obvious suspicion. That quiet tension immediately separates Hackdirt from every other town in Cyrodiil. Its isolation reinforces this discomfort. Hackdirt sits far from major roads. Travellers rarely arrive accidentally. The village feels disconnected from the wider empire, almost forgotten. That physical separation becomes psychologically significant. Players quickly realise there will be no nearby guards, no bustling inn filled with witnesses. If something goes wrong here, help is a very long way away. The village itself begins feeling like a trap long before players discover the truth. The residents amplify this atmosphere enormously. Unlike openly hostile enemies, Hackdirt's inhabitants remain outwardly polite, mostly. Yet their politeness always feels forced, somewhat artificial. Their conversations become evasive whenever outsiders ask too many questions. Many refuse to explain local customs. Others quietly warn players to leave. Nobody really behaves naturally here. Every interaction suggests people are hiding something. That uncertainty becomes far more frightening than immediate violence. The imagination begins filling gaps before the game ever confirms your suspicions. The visual design perfectly complements this growing paranoia. Buildings appear old, poorly maintained. Many structures seem almost abandoned. The village never looks prosperous. Instead, it feels frozen in decline. Time itself appears to have slowed. Decay gradually overtakes civilization. Even during daylight, Hackdirt rarely feels welcoming. Shadows dominate narrow streets, the architecture lacks warmth, everything seems weathered by generations of secrecy. Comparisons with Innsmouth become immediately obvious. Like Lovecraft's infamous fishing town, Hackdirt creates horror through community rather than monsters. Initially, the villagers themselves become the source of fear, not because they attack immediately, because they behave collectively. Everyone seems to know something. Everyone protects the same secrets. The player remains the only person excluded. That social isolation becomes deeply unsettling. You aren't simply visiting another town. You're entering somebody else's closed world. The quest, The Shadow over Hackdirt, gradually reveals just how dangerous that world has become. Searching for Dharma begins innocently enough. She simply failed to return home. Nothing initially suggests supernatural horror. Players expect kidnapping, bandits, perhaps wild animals. Instead, the investigation slowly uncovers something considerably stranger. The deeper players look, the less ordinary Hackdirt appears. Every clue increases tension rather than resolving it. One of Hackdirt's greatest strengths lies beneath the village. The caverns hidden below transform the settlement completely. Suddenly, ordinary buildings become entrances to something ancient, forgotten, almost impossible. The tunnels stretch beneath everyday life, like buried history refusing to disappear. Descending underground feels remarkably claustrophobic. Stone corridors narrow, darkness thickens. Every step carries growing anticipation. The village above suddenly seems insignificant compared to what has existed beneath it all along. Then there are the Brethren. Few creatures in Oblivion receive so little direct explanation while remaining so memorable. Players rarely see them clearly. Their appearances remain fleeting, ambiguous. The game deliberately avoids complete revelation. That restraint proves incredibly effective. Whatever the Brethren truly are become less important than what players imagine them to be. Hackdirt understands one of horror's oldest principles. The unknown is often more frightening than certainty. Religious culture forms another critical layer of the village's identity. The residents don't simply hide secrets, they worship them. Their devotion shapes every aspect of community life. Generations have accepted beliefs separating Hackdirt from ordinary society. Faith becomes isolation, isolation becomes fear, fear ultimately becomes tradition. The cycle continues endlessly. Unlike many Elder Scrolls cults seeking political power or Daedric favour, Hackdirt's belief system feels intensely local. Self-contained, almost forgotten by the outside world. That small scale somehow makes it more believable. Another fascinating aspect of Hackdirt is how normal its horrors initially appears. There are no Daedric invasions, no dragons, no apocalyptic prophecies. Everything begins with suspicious villagers. Players instinctively recognise that something feels wrong long before supernatural elements emerge. The horror grows organically, conversation by conversation, building by building. That gradual escalation mirrors classic psychological horror remarkably well. Even the lighting contributes significantly. Hackdirt rarely feels comfortable illuminated. Clouds soften daylight, interiors remain dim, night transforms the village almost completely. Darkness doesn't merely reduce visibility, it changes perception. Familiar buildings suddenly appear threatening, empty roads become ominous. Every shadow invites suspicion. Compared to places like Bruma, the contrast becomes striking. Those towns encourage exploration. Hackdirt quietly discourages it. Every instinct tells the player they should probably leave. Yet curiosity pushes them onward. That conflict between caution and investigation becomes central to the experience. Players willingly enter danger because unanswered questions become impossible to ignore. The lack of trustworthy allies further increases unease. Ordinarily, Oblivion provides numerous friendly NPCs ready to assist. Hackdirt offers remarkably little reassurance. Most conversations deepen suspicion rather than reducing it. The player remains isolated throughout much of the quest. Even after rescuing Dharma, certainty never fully returns. The village keeps many of its mysteries. Environmental storytelling also deserves enormous credit as well. Rather than explaining everything through dialogue, Hackdirt allows players to infer much of its history. Architecture, underground passages, resident behaviour, religious symbolism. Everything quietly contributes pieces of a larger narrative. The village trusts players to connect those pieces themselves. That participation strengthens immersion considerably. The horror feels discovered rather than delivered. Perhaps the most unsettling element is how believable Hackdirt feels within its own context. Real communities have isolated themselves throughout history, developed unusual traditions, distrusted outsiders, protected uncomfortable secrets. Hackdirt exaggerates those tendencies, but only slightly. The village never feels completely impossible. It feels disturbingly plausible. That realism anchors its supernatural elements. Unlike many fantasy locations relying upon spectacular magic, Hackdirt relies primarily upon human behaviour. Fear of outsiders, collective silence, generational secrecy. Only afterwards do strangers' truths emerge. By then, players are already emotionally invested. The horror has taken root. Ultimately, Hackdirt earns its place among the most unsettling places in all of the Elder Scrolls because it abandons conventional fantasy almost entirely in favour of slow-burning psychological horror. Its isolated location, oppressive silence, suspicious residents, hidden underground network, and unmistakable Lovecraftian influences combine to create an experience unlike anywhere else in the series. Rather than frightening players through constant combat or overwhelming supernatural spectacle, Hackdirt unsettles by making every conversation feel unnatural. Every street feels watched, and every unanswered question feels more dangerous than the last. It reminds players that some of Tameriel's greatest horrors aren't ancient dragons or Daedric princes. Sometimes they're hidden inside forgotten villages where everyone knows your face the moment you arrive. Nobody wants you asking questions, and the greatest danger isn't what lives beneath the town, it's the people who have spent generations protecting it. Long after you've escaped Hackdirt and returned to Cyrodiil's brighter roads, one uncomfortable feeling remains. The sense that if you had arrived just a little later, stayed just a little longer, or asked one too many questions, you might have never left at all. For much of the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, Cyrodiil is presented as the heart of civilization. Grand cities rise above the countryside, well-maintained roads connect prosperous settlements, and the Empire projects an image of order, stability, and wealth. Then there is Bravil, situated along the banks of the Nibin River. Bravil immediately feels different from every other major city in the province. It lacks the polished stone walls of Chorrol, the scholarly elegance of Cheydinal, the bustling commercial success of the Imperial City, or the noble prestige of Anvil. Instead, players are greeted by leaning wooden buildings, muddy streets, crumbling docks, and a population that seems to be merely surviving rather than living. Nothing about Bravil feels prosperous. Everything appears worn down by years of neglect, poverty, and quiet desperation. It is one of the few places in the Elder Scrolls that deliberately strips away the romantic image of medieval fantasy and replaces it with something far less comfortable. Rather than feeling like a city of opportunity, Breville feels like a place people end up when they have nowhere else to go. That atmosphere alone makes it one of the most unsettling locations in the entire series, not because of monsters or ancient curses, but because its horrors feel painfully believable. The first thing players notice is the architecture. Most cities across Cyrodiil are carefully planned. Stone houses, wide streets, organised districts. Breville feels almost improvised. Buildings lean awkwardly over narrow walkways. Wooden supports appear hastily repaired. Many homes seem barely capable of supporting their own weight. The city almost resembles something assembled gradually over decades rather than intentionally constructed. Nothing feels permanent, everything appears fragile. That physical instability quietly reflects the lives of people living there. The wooden construction also creates an unusual visual contrast. Elsewhere in Cyrodiil, wealth is often expressed through clean masonry and elegant civic buildings. Breville lacks almost all of that. Weathered timber dominates the skyline. Rotting docks stretch into murky water. Rain seems to soak permanently into every surface. Even on clear days, the city feels damp. The environment constantly suggests neglect, as though repairs stopped long ago because nobody could afford to continue them. Its location also reinforces this atmosphere. Breville sits beside the Nibin River, yet rather than benefiting from trade and prosperity, it feels trapped by its surroundings. The waterways appear stagnant, the docks rarely bustle with commerce. Instead of serving as symbols of economic success, they almost feel abandoned. The river becomes another reminder that natural beauty alone cannot overcome social decline. One of the most unsettling aspects of Breville is its poverty. The Elder Scrolls rarely dwells extensively on economic hardship. Most settlements maintain at least the appearance of stability. Breville openly abandons that illusion. Many residents struggle financially. Homes remain small, businesses feel modest. There is a constant impression that life here requires daily endurance rather than long-term ambition. Players don't merely hear about poverty, they walk through it. That realism grounds the city in a way few fantasy locations attempt. The skooma trade further deepens this sense of decay. Throughout Tameriel, skooma exists as an illegal and highly addictive narcotic. Many cities acknowledge its existence. Breville appears consumed by it. Addiction quietly shapes the local population. Entire quests revolve around uncovering the city's underground drug network. Unlike distant criminal organizations hidden in forgotten caves, Breville's problem exists in plain sight. Everyone seems aware, very little changes. That normalization becomes deeply unsettling. The guards contribute significantly to this feeling as well. Ordinarily, city guards represent security, authority, and order. Breville's guards rarely inspire confidence. They patrol the streets, yet crime continues flourishing around them. Corruption quietly undermines public trust. Players quickly realize the law exists here more as appearance than reality. Protection feels inconsistent, justice uncertain. When authority itself appears indifferent, every problem becomes considerably more frightening. Compared with cities like Skingrad, Breville lacks visible civic pride. There are few grand public spaces, few impressive landmarks, very little suggesting collective optimism. Instead, the city almost seems resigned to its condition. Residents continue living because they must, not because they expect improvement. That emotional resignation quietly defines the atmosphere. The city has not simply become poor, it has accepted poverty as normal. Its residents reinforce this impression through countless subtle interactions. Many conversations revolve around hardship, suspicion, financial struggle. Hope rarely dominates discussion. People speak pragmatically, often defensively. Everyone seems accustomed to disappointment. That shared mindset creates remarkable consistency throughout the city. Breville doesn't merely look different, it thinks differently. The guilds provide another interesting contrast. Most Elder Scrolls cities proudly display institutions representing learning, commerce, or magical advancement. Breville technically possesses these organisations, yet even they seem diminished. Everything feels smaller, less influential, almost overshadowed by the city's broader social decline. The usual symbols of civilization struggle to elevate the surrounding atmosphere. Even the Chapel of Mara feels unusually subdued. Religion traditionally offers comfort during difficult times. Here it feels almost overwhelmed. The chapel stands as one of the few peaceful locations within the city, yet stepping outside immediately returns players to poverty and uncertainty. Hope exists, but only in small pockets, never dominating the overall mood. Night transforms Breville completely. The narrow streets become darker, the wooden buildings cast long shadows across muddy paths. Fewer people remain outside. Silence gradually replaces daytime activity. The city never feels particularly safe after sunset, not because enemies constantly attack, because visibility disappears. Every corner feels capable of hiding trouble. Ordinary streets become quietly intimidating. Another fascinating aspect is how Breville undermines players' expectations. Fantasy cities often celebrate heroism, adventure, prosperity. Breville celebrates none of those things. Instead, it quietly asks players to confront social problems impossible to solve with swords. Defeating bandits changes little. Closing Oblivion gates also changes not much. The city's greatest issues persist regardless of heroic accomplishment. That permanence becomes one of its defining characteristics. Compared with Hack Dirt, the contrast becomes particularly revealing. Hack Dirt unsettles through secrecy, Breville unsettles through openness. Nothing remains hidden. The poverty is visible, the addiction is visible, the neglect is also visible as well. Players cannot pretend these problems don't exist. The city places them directly in front of you. There is also remarkable environmental storytelling throughout Breville. Small homes packed closely together. Weathered market stalls, damaged infrastructure, every detail quietly reinforces the same narrative. Resources remain scarce, maintenance remains inconsistent, life continues despite circumstances rather than because of them. Bethesda rarely explains this directly. The environment tells the story instead. There is also an emotional exhaustion hanging over Breville. Unlike cities constantly striving towards greater prosperity, Breville feels tired, as though generations have accepted decline as inevitable. Buildings continue standing because they haven't yet collapsed. People continue working because alternatives do not exist. Hope survives barely. That quiet fatigue becomes surprisingly contagious. Players often find themselves eager to leave, not because the city lacks quality, because it succeeds so completely at creating discomfort. Even its position within Cyrodiil contributes symbolically. The province often represents the height of imperial civilization. Breville quietly exposes the cracks beneath that image. Empires project strength, Breville reveals weakness. No nation, regardless of its power, can entirely eliminate inequality. The city becomes evidence that prosperity rarely reaches everyone equally. Ultimately, Breville earns its place among the most unsettling places in all of the Elder Scrolls because it replaces supernatural terror with something far more grounded and disturbingly believable. Its decaying architecture, pervasive poverty, entrenched skooma trade, ineffective law enforcement, and overwhelming sense of social neglect create an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in Cyrodiil. Rather than frightening players through monsters or magic, Breville unsettles by revealing the ordinary suffering that continues beneath the Empire's polished image. It strips away the comforting fantasy of perfect medieval cities and replaces it with a community trapped by circumstances that no single hero can truly fix. Even after the Oblivion crisis ends and Tameriel is saved once again, Breville remains much the same. Its streets remain worn, its people continue struggling, its buildings continue leaning towards collapse. That permanence is perhaps the city's most unsettling quality of all. Because some places aren't haunted by ghosts, they're haunted by the quiet realization that for the people forced to call them home, tomorrow will probably look exactly like yesterday. Skyrim is full of inns and taverns where travellers can rest their heads, share a drink, and warm themselves against the bitter winds outside. Places like the Bened Mare in Whiterun, Candlehearth Hall in Windhelm, or the Bee and Barb in Riften are designed to be communal, bustling, and welcoming, at least in their own way. Yet hidden within the icy walls of Windhelm lies an inn that feels entirely different, the New Genesis Corner Club. This Dunmar-run establishment is more than just a tavern. It is a symbol of exile, alienation, and survival in the face of prejudice. Instead of laughter and music, its walls hold hushed conversations and bitter laments. Instead of warmth, its atmosphere is heavy with unease. To step inside the New Genesis Corner Club is not to find rest, but to feel the weight of displaced people struggling to belong. It is this unique and unsettling quality that makes the Corner Club stand apart from every other inn in Skyrim. It is not merely a place of food and drink. It is a living reminder of the fractures that divide the city, and by extension, Skyrim itself. To understand the New Genesis Corner Club, one must first understand what a corner club is. In Dunmar culture, corner clubs are taverns that originated in Morrowind. They are not just bars, but meeting places where politics, business, and community intersect. They serve as vital social hubs in Dunmar towns, blending drink with debate and gossip with refuge. This corner club, however, is not in Morrowind. It sits in Windhelm, far from its cultural roots, transplanted after the Red Mountain eruption devastated the Dark Elf homeland. For the Dunmar refugees forced to settle in Skyrim, creating a corner club in the Grey Quarter was an attempt to preserve a piece of their heritage. Yet this very transplantation makes it unsettling. The New Genesis Corner Club is both familiar and alien, a cultural sanctuary placed inside a city that openly despises it. Its very name, New Genesis, evokes the memory of Genesis, a Dunmar settlement destroyed during the Red Year. In this way, the inn is haunted not by spirits, but by the ghost of a lost homeland. The Corner Club sits in the heart of Windhelm's Grey Quarter, the segregated district where nearly all Dunmar are forced to live. The Grey Quarter itself is bleak, buildings are crumbling, the streets are unkept, and guards and Nords alike treat the Dunmar here with open disdain. The very name of the district strips it from all of its dignity, branding it with a label that reduces its people to outsiders. Within this context, the New Genesis Corner Club feels both necessary and tragic. It provides a place where Dunmar can gather, shielded from the hostile gaze of the wider city. Yet this safety is also a form of isolation. Instead of being integrated into Windhelm's social life, the Corner Club becomes a ghetto within a ghetto. A reminder that the Dunmar are unwelcome elsewhere. When you walk through the Grey Quarter and step into the Corner Club, the mood shifts. The laughter and openness of Skyrim's other taverns are absent. Here, the inn is not an escape from the city, but a microcosm of its oppression. At the centre of the Corner Club stands Ambari's Render, its Dunmar innkeeper. Ambari's is not the jovial, welcoming figure you might expect from someone who runs a tavern. Instead, he is curt, suspicious, and openly bitter towards Nords. His words drip with resentment, reflecting the constant discrimination his people endure in Windhelm. His attitude unsettles players because it is so different from the norm. Most innkeepers in Skyrim greet you warmly, eager for your business and full of local gossip. But this innkeeper, by contrast, seems wary, cynical, and angry. He does not run the Corner Club out of joy or ambition, but out of necessity. He is not wrong to feel this way. The prejudice the Dunmar face in Windhelm is well documented, and his bitterness is a form of survival. Yet his demeanour reinforces the Corner Club's unsettling tone. Instead of offering comfort, he mirrors the alienation of his patrons. His inn is not a place to relax, but a place to stew in resentment. The Corner Club's regulars add further to its unsettling nature. Inside you will find Dunmar refugees gathered around tables, speaking in hushed tones about their struggles. Some complain of their treatment by Nords, others express longing for Morrowind, but none seem truly happy. There is no bard here, no music, no sense of celebration. Instead, the Corner Club feels like a survival space, where people cling to one another because they have nowhere else to go. The laughter and song of Candlehearth Hall, are replaced by murmurs and sighs. Even when quests take you here, such as meeting potential followers or overhearing dialogue related to the Grey Quarter, the tone remains subdued. This is not a place of opportunity, but a reminder of displacement. In this way, the Corner Club feels less like an inn and more like a refugee camp, which it is. It unsettles the player not with overt hostility, but with its quiet despair. The menu of New Genesis Corner Club also reinforces its unsettling aura. Here you find a mix of Dunmar cuisine, alongside more typical Skyrim offerings. These drinks and foods are echoes of a homeland most of the patrons will never see again. For the Dunmar, ordering a glass of Sujama is not just about taste, but about memory. Yet for a Nord or another outsider, the menu feels foreign. The Corner Club does not cater to the broader population of Windhelm, it caters to the displaced. To drink here is to participate in a culture that exists in exile, surrounded by hostility. This cultural alienation deepens that unease. While other inns integrate seamlessly into their towns, the Corner Club feels like a fragment of another world, awkwardly transplanted into Skyrim. It is both familiar and foreign, a place that reminds you that you do not truly belong here. This nature of the Corner Club becomes even clearer when compared to Candlehearth Hall, Windhelm's main inn. Candlehearth Hall is warm, lively and welcoming, at least to Nords. A bard plays music, patrons share stories, and the inn feels like a hub of the city. Its very name suggests warmth and light, a place where fire and community banish the cold. The Corner Club, by contrast, is quiet, cold and subdued. Its patrons are not locals sharing laughter, but refugees nursing grievances. Its name, New Genesis, does not evoke light or warmth, but loss. A new home built because the old one was destroyed. This contrast within the same city is what makes the Corner Club truly unsettling. It's not simply that the inn feels somber, it is that across town another inn thrives, full of joy and full of life, while the Corner Club just sits there, stagnating. The divide between them mirrors the broader divide in Windhelm, and to experience both is to feel the fracture at the heart of the city. For the Dragonborn entering the New Genesis Corner Club, it can be jarring. In most inns, you are welcomed warmly, even as a stranger. Here you are met with suspicion. The innkeeper may serve you, but he does not smile. The patrons may acknowledge you and talk to you, but they do not celebrate your arrival. This unsettles the player because it breaks expectation. Skyrim trains you to view inns as safe havens, places of respite from danger. But in this place, safety is replaced with tension. You are not among friends here. You are an outsider stepping into someone else's refuge. Even if you're a Dunmar Dragonborn, the tone remains the same. The Corner Club is not a place of joy for anyone. It is a place of survival that makes it unique and deeply disquieting. The Corner Club will never be the most popular place in Skyrim. It will never host raucous bards or rowdy celebrations, but it does not need to. Its unsettling nature is precisely what makes it powerful. In its quiet bitterness, it tells the story of displaced people. In its hushed tones, it reflects the fractures of Windhelm. In its uneasy atmosphere, it unsettles players not with ghosts or curses, but with truths about exile and alienation. And that is why the New Genesis Corner Club, more than any other inn in Skyrim, deserves the title as the most unsettling inn in all of Skyrim. Skyrim is a land of worship. Its people pray to gods, kneel before shrines, and whisper oaths to Daedra in candlelit caves. But among all of its faiths, divine or profane, none are as ancient, as chilling, or as enduring as the dragon cult. Long before the Empire, before Talos, before the 9 divines were even named, Skyrim belonged to the dragons. The skies themselves were their thrones, and the mortals below were their worshippers. But when the gods above and the mortals below rebelled against that tyranny, the dragon servants, priests, and zealots, who called themselves the dragon cult, fought to preserve their faith. Their temples still scar the mountains. Of them all, one place stands as the most sinister and haunting, the ancient ruin of Forelhost. Perched high in the mountains of the Rift, its halls still echo with the devotion of the dead. its air thick with the silence of centuries. Here the dragon cult made its last tragic stand, a cult that refused to die, even when their gods had fallen. To understand why Forelhost is so deeply unsettling, one must first step back into Skyrim's earliest age, when the dragons ruled as gods and mortals were but tools. The dragon cult was the mortal expression of that rule. Its members believed that the dragons were divine, beings of ultimate order and eternal power. The cult's priests, chosen for their devotion and knowledge of the voice, served as intermediaries between dragons and men. They organized worship, collected tribute, and enforced draconic law. Their words carried as much authority as their master's wings. It was a system built on awe and fear. The dragons were immortal, powerful, and merciless. The cult thrived in this climate, convincing mortals that subservience was a form of salvation. It was better to kneel before the dragons they taught than to burn beneath them. The unsettling thing about the dragon cult is not that they worshipped dragons, but that their faith was very sincere. These were not fools tricked into servitude. They believed utterly that the dragon's dominion was the natural order, that resistance was heresy, and that death in service of their sealed gods was glory. It was not a religion, it was an empire of devotion. High in the mountains south of Riften stands Forelhost, a ruin so ancient it predates most of Skyrim's cities. It was not merely a temple, it was a fortress, a sanctuary, and a tomb. When the Dragon War erupted, when men, led by the tongues, turned against their dragon overlords, the cult retreated to places like Forelhost, while other strongholds fell to rebellion and dragonfire alike. Forelhost endured. Here the last remnants of the faithful gathered under their high priest, Ragot, whose name in the dragon tongue means anger. It was a name both feared and revered. Unlike many of his peers, he did not despair at the dragon's fall. He saw it as a test of faith. When news reached this location that Alduin, the World Eater himself, had vanished, he declared that the dragon's return was inevitable, and that his followers must be ready to greet them, even if it took eternity. So they sealed the gates, burned the bridges, and prepared for death. What happened next is the reason Forelhost remained so haunting. Rather than surrendering, he ordered his followers to drink poison rather than submit to the advancing enemies. They chose to die for their gods rather than live without them. Every skeleton in those halls is not the victim of war, but of belief. Their deaths were not defeat, they were worship. When the Dragonborn eventually delves into Forelhost, centuries later, Ragot still waits. He is no longer a man nor even a priest. He has become a dragon priest, a lick sustained by ancient magics and the lingering will of the dragons themselves. His mask, carved in green metal and inscribed with power, is both his crown and his curse. It grants strength and protection, but blinds him eternally to his duty. He stands as one of the most powerful dragon priests in Skyrim, but what makes him truly terrifying is not his might, it's his purpose. He waits in the ruins surrounded by the undead remains of his flock, still guarding the relics and secrets of his cult. His faith has transcended death itself. Unlike other people whose undeath is born of selfish desire, his immortality is devotional. He does not cling to life to extend his power. He exists solely to serve the dragons until they return. In him, the line between priest and corpses vanish. Ragot is a sermon made flesh, a monument to belief unbroken by time. The architecture of Forelhost itself tells the story of its madness. The deeper one goes, the more the temple feels like a descent into the human psyche. A labyrinth of worship, paranoia, and sacrifice. At the entrance, altars to the dragons dominate the halls. But as you travel deeper, the structure becomes more claustrophobic, more erratic, as if the very walls were warped by desperation. Inscriptions in the dragon tongue praise Alduin, and the eternal return. Offerings of bones and gold still rest on ancient pedestals. Statues of dragon heads leer from the shadows, their mouths open as if mid-roar. What is most unsettling, however, are the crypts. Dozens of sarcophagi line the walls, each containing the mummified remains of cultists who entombed themselves voluntarily. Some still clutch goblets or daggers, ritual implements from their final moments. Others lie facing upward, arms crossed, as if waiting for resurrection. This place is not a ruin of defeat. It's a temple that chose death on its own terms. A museum for fanatics who refuse to yield. When the Dragonborn arrives in Skyrim, the dragons have returned. Alduin flies again and the world trembles. Yet even in this new age of fire, the dragon cult's faith is obsolete. Their gods are not the same creatures that once ruled Skyrim. Alduin himself devours souls rather than shepherds them, but Rhagot and his disciples remain trapped in a loop of devotion, unable to see that their gods have changed, or that world has forgotten them. In a way, the tragedy of Forelhost mirrors the tragedy of belief itself. When faith becomes rigid, it decays. The cult's followers believed so completely in the dragon's divinity that even the end of the world could not shake them. They chose martyrdom over truth. What makes Forelhost unsettling is not just the undead or the poison or the silence. It's the sincerity. These people truly believed they were serving the natural order. To them, the end of their lives was not horror, it was fulfillment. This place is not haunted by evil spirits, it's haunted by faith without reason. By the time of the Dragonborn, Skyrim's people regard the dragon cult as myth, old bedtime stories about evil priests and cursed ruins. But the ruins themselves tell a different story. The unsettling truth is that the dragon cult isn't gone. Its remnants still stir in the corners of Skyrim's wilderness. Draga still awaken to ancient calls, hag-ravens whisper the old words, and the dragons themselves, newly resurrected, unknowingly breathe life into the cult's old prophecies. Forelhost is more than a ruin, it's a warning. It shows what happens when faith loses its gods, but keeps its rituals. The modern Nords pray to Talos and the Divines, yet they too also walk this edge. In the Civil War, brother kills brother for belief. The dragon cult, in its fanatic devotion, is not as far removed from Skyrim's present as it seems. The dragon cult's story begins with worship and ends with silence, but that silence is not peace, it's patience. Forelhost remains a wound in Skyrim's history, an open reminder that devotion can outlive reason. Its undead priests guard not treasure, but ideology. Its air is thick with the weight of belief, too heavy to decay. And as the Dragonborn walks those ancient halls, one cannot help but feel watched, not by ghosts, but by memory itself. The walls remember, the dead remember as well. Forelhost was not just a place of death, it was a place of purpose, and in Skyrim, purpose never really dies. Skyrim is filled with danger. Dragons circle mountain peaks, Falmer stalk the underground, vampires hide in frozen crypts. But there is one dungeon that feels different, one that does not simply house danger, it is danger. Hidden in the mountains of the Reach, far from the safety of cities, and far from the comfort of main quest lines, lies Valthuma. At first glance it appears to be just another Nordic ruin, ancient stone, moss-covered walls, Draga waiting in silence. The kind of place you clear once and forget. But it is not just another tomb, it is a prison, and it's failing. Valthuma is the resting place of Hevnarak, a dragon priest whose name is not spoken with the same reverence or fear as some of the others. But that may be a mistake, because he is not merely powerful, he is patient. Long ago, during the height of the dragon cult, he sought immortality not through loyalty to dragons, but through forbidden alchemical experimentation. His obsession with plague, poison, and unnatural longevity made him feared even among his own kind. The ancient Nords understood something terrifying. Hevnerak was not content with death, so they sealed him away in Valthuma. But they didn't simply entomb him. They built layers of containment, and that is what makes this dungeon different. It is not a resting place, it is a warning. Most Nordic ruins are tombs of reverence, burial chambers for honoured warriors who rise as Draga to defend sacred halls. Valthuma feels wrong from the moment you enter. The architecture is heavy, oppressive. Narrow corridors wind deeper into the earth, as if the structure itself is trying to suffocate whatever lies below. This is not a monument, it is a vault, and like any vault, it has keys. Before you can reach Hevnerak, you must confront and defeat two powerful dragon priest guardians, ancient wardens placed there specifically to prevent resurrection. Their presence reveals something important. The ancient Nords feared what lay beneath more than they feared invasion. They didn't want to honour Hevnerak, they wanted to contain him. That alone elevates this dungeon above most of Skyrim's other dungeons. It was designed with paranoia. What makes Valthuma uniquely dangerous is that the Dragonborn must participate in the very act the ancient Nords sought to prevent. To face Hevnerak, you must complete a ritual. You gather the ceremonial skulls, you unlock inner chambers, you activate the final confrontation. In doing so, you become the final key. This is one of Skyrim's most subtle narrative traps. The dungeon is structured so that the player inadvertently finishes what history tried to stop. The Guardians you defeat were not protecting treasure, they were protecting the world. And once Hevnerak awakens, it becomes clear why. Unlike many dragon priests, Hevnerak specializes in poison and disease. His mask grants immunity to poison and resistance to disease, reflecting his obsession with biological corruption. He is not just a mage, he's a plague bearer. In a world where most enemies rely on brute force, Hevnerak represents something insidious, slow, inevitable decay. Valthuma's location in the Reach is no coincidence. The Reach is already one of Skyrim's most unstable regions. Forsworn rebels wage guerrilla war against Markarth. Dwemer ruins dot the cliffs. Political corruption festers within the city walls. It is a land of old grudges and buried horrors. Placing Valthuma here reinforces its danger. The Reach is symbolic of things buried but never resolved. And beneath it lies a dragon priest who embodies the same theme. Hevnerak's imprisonment mirrors the Reach itself. Ancient violence sealed away, but never truly erased. If this dungeon were to fall unchecked, the Reach would be the first to suffer. And given its fragile state, it might not survive. There are more difficult dungeons in Skyrim mechanically. There are larger ones, more complex ones. But few feel as claustrophobic and tense as Valthuma. The deeper you go, the more deliberate the structure feels. There are no grand open caverns like Blackreach, no sprawling Dwemer machinery, no dramatic waterfalls. Just stone. Stone and silence. The dungeon compresses you as you go. It forces close combat with Draga Deathlords in narrow hallways. It denies open strategy. It corners you. By the time you reach the ritual chamber, you feel trapped, as though you have descended too far to retreat comfortably. That psychological design makes this dungeon dangerous beyond its enemies. It pressures the player. Most dragon priests persuade power through dragon worship. Hevnerak pursued something colder. His mask's properties suggest a fixation on resisting corruption and decay. He wasn't trying to conquer kingdoms, he was trying to conquer his own biology. That makes him uniquely terrifying. Poison and disease are democratic forces. They do not discriminate. They do not respect power. In a medieval world like Skyrim, plague could wipe out holds. The ancient Nords likely understood that Hevnerak's experiments were not simply heretical, they were existential threats. He was not a warlord, he was a scientist without ethics, and that makes him far more dangerous. Valthuma is deceptive in another way. It is accessible relatively early. There are no level gates, no quest prerequisites demanding high progression. An inexperienced Dragonborn can wander into this dungeon and awaken something far beyond their readiness. And because the ritual is structured as a progression puzzle rather than a clear warning, players not realise the scale of what they're unlocking until it's too late. That subtle trap makes it one of the most dangerous dungeons for unsuspecting adventurers. You think you're clearing a ruin, but you're really breaking a seal. After defeating Hevnerak, you claim his mask, a powerful artifact granting poison immunity and disease resistance. On the surface, it's just loot, but symbolically it represents inheritance. You now carry the legacy of the Plague Priest. You wear the face of a man who experimented with death itself. There's something quietly unsettling about that. Skyrim rarely forces players to confront the morality of the artifacts they collect. But Valthuma lingers. You did what the ancient Nords failed to do permanently. You woke him, and then you ended him. But you also proved that his prison was fragile. What if someone less capable had entered? Many Skyrim dungeons are dangerous because of spectacle. Labyrinthian is epic. Faralhost is tragic. Blackreach is overwhelming. Valthuma is different. Its danger lies in implication. It is a prison barely holding. It is a ritual waiting to be completed. It is a dragon priest obsessed with plague, sealed beneath an already unstable hold. And most players stumble upon it accidentally. That combination, accessibility, narrative depth, atmospheric pressure, and moral implication elevates it above Skyrim's other ruins. It feels less like a dungeon and more like a mistake waiting to happen. When you leave Valthuma, the world continues as normal. Markarth still stands, the Reach still rebels, dragons still roam the skies. But something lingers. You know that beneath the mountains, ancient horrors were not simply buried, they were feared. And you know that if history forgets why a prison was built, someone will eventually open it. Valthuma is not the most famous dungeon, it is not the largest, it does not house the final boss of the game, but it embodies Skyrim's most dangerous truth. Not all ruins are meant to be explored, some are meant to remain sealed. And when curiosity overrides caution, the consequences echo far beyond stone walls. Hevnerak is gone, but the lesson remains. In a land of dragons and war, sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that waits quietly beneath your feet.